like you, Bill. I just your mommy. I know your church is true. I love my mom and dad and my brothers and sisters.
I know that Christ lives and that he loves me. And I know beyond a
shadow of a doubt that Joseph Smith was a true prophet of God.
I know.
If you could focus on the podcast now instead of the cat. Hello and welcome to Beyond a Doubt podcast. Today we have Jonathan and me. I put some feelers out on social media and asked whatever audience I have what they wanted to hear about. And the first person to reply was my cousin. And she said, I'd be interested in more about your perspective on relationships, boyfriend/husband, when you were active versus after leaving the church. Did your view of yourself and your role in those sort of things, in those sort of relationships change? So that's what we're going to approach today, is how relationships were viewed, obviously. Basically as a member versus now.
Yeah.
And this one's kind of a loaded question. So, in the church, they teach about how like marriage is marriage and children are the ultimate goal. But marriage is the number one. Duh, because children. But I mean, like if you can't have children, is like at least you're married, and you can get into the celestial kingdom, the highest part of the celestial kingdom.
Yeah.
And you can become like gods. If you are married, and like things like being a seminary teacher or a leader of the church, you have to be married. You cannot be single. So it's pretty important. What?
That's a pretty nutty qualification for.
I always thought that too, honestly. Like, I mean, especially
that doesn't mean anything. It just means that you got somebody to agree to enter into a civil contract with you. That's literally it. It doesn't confer any degree of life experience or anything.
Or like worthiness. It's just married. That's the first thing they look at, is not who you are, but if you're married.
Yeah.
Especially the women, like leaders of the young women's or something. The high up, there's no way you can do that without a husband.
That's insane.
I wondered, like, if a woman became widowed or something, like what would happen then? Or if, heaven forbid, they got a divorce. I don't think they actually get divorces when you're high up in the church. It's like a shameful thing. Anyway,
they call it quiet divorce, perhaps, or a soft divorce.
A soft divorce.
Yeah, they just they each have their own bedroom, sleep in different beds.
Yeah, that would not surprise me. So there's the basics of marriage, very important. My view then, therefore, as a young Mormon, first of all, I was a hopeless romantic. Especially when I was, not especially, I was my whole life, but it started in first grade when I got my first crush. His name was Steven. He was in my class.
Steven.
And he moved out, and I liked him. In the middle of first grade, he moved away. I liked him the whole of my elementary experience. Didn't tell anybody that. There's this other boy who had a crush on me and expressed it, and I felt obligated to tell him I liked him back. And for the whole of the rest of elementary school, he and I were good friends. I thought we were good friends. We'd play like Nintendo together and everything. But at school, all the teachers were like, you guys are cute. So I kind of felt like I was supposed to like him. I didn't.
I think that's kind of a thing that maybe a lot of people go through that just doesn't get talked about, because I've heard that more than once from different people that it's especially girls where you
don't want to let them down.
Or you just think that that's just sort of the protocol is like
sure.
You told me you liked me, so it's sort of my job. I remember talking to a couple of girls in high school at one point, expressing that in their opinion, like the more standard experience is like getting asked out by a dude that you have no interest in, or like pursuing a dude that has no interest in you, but like the situations in which two people actually, had an interest in one another were more rare.
Yeah, I think that's like standard across the board. Because honestly, once you find somebody that you are what is that word? Reciprocated.
Reciprocal.
Yeah. Or where it is reciprocated.
Where there is reciprocity.
Okay, so many versions of this one word. Where feelings are reciprocated, okay? Mm-hmm. There we go. That's rare enough, and when you find that, you finally actually consider getting married or having a relationship, a more serious one. Mm-hmm. Anyway, because everybody goes through that. Once you find that, you're kind of done. Mm-hmm. First, I want to go into the kind of person that I was without the influence of the church. Hopeless romantic my whole life. I knew immediately that I liked boys. There was never of course, I didn't really know that there was the other side of it until I was older. However, I just knew immediately that I liked boys. Major crushes on them.
Yeah.
There's also when I was like, I'm going to say even like first grade, I really looked forward to having somebody romantic that I was involved with. Mm-hmm. And then, but I was also way too literal about it. So like I would, even in later elementary school, girls would be writing on their little notebooks, I love so-and-so. And then we'd talk about it like, oh my gosh, I'm so in love with this guy. And I would be like, you are ridiculous. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say that, but I would when they're like, who do you love? And I'm like, I don't love anybody. I like this person. Mm-hmm. I don't love him. I'm way too young to know what being in love is. And they like stare blankly at me and I'm, anyway, so next, who do you like? I took it extremely, I was very grown up about it. Mm-hmm. And then like being raised in the church, you don't date at all until you're 16, making out. No. Mm-hmm. In fact, there was this one time when I was in college. Okay. You're old enough to start making out.
Yeah.
In college, but I had a roommate who we were trying to move from southern Utah up to BYU area in Provo, south of Salt Lake.
Wait, so that's like that Provo is not considered southern Utah?
Southern Salt Lake, south of Salt Lake. No, this is very far.
Like St. George-ish?
St. George is really southern. I guess I mean like middle Utah, like Ephraim, Nephi. Okay.
The wasteland.
Actually, those are the areas where the FLDS church are located.
Yeah.
So I was not far from them. I'll hop, skip, and a jump away. In fact, I had somebody try and convert me anyway, but that's a different story.
Oh my God, that is horrifying.
Yeah. It was my uncle. Duh. He sent a message to me from somebody from a friend that was down there. He got to chatting, and they're like, oh, hey, you're a Wicker, so you know Elena? Like, yeah, that's my niece. They had a little conversation, and he says, will you send her back a message for me? He's like, yeah, sure. So next time I saw this guy, he's like, hey, I have an uncle from your message. Wow. I've got a message from your uncle. He says, when are you going to see the light and join the true church with polygamy and everything? And I was like, what?
Oh, God. That is so gross.
Like when are you going to see the light was the biggest, and accept who you are kind of thing, And it's just like, my light is different than that's for sure. Anyway, so we were moving from there to BYU, and before you go to BYU, you have to be approved. Now, I wasn't going to the school, neither was my roommate, but we had to have a bishop's interview to be worthy enough to move into student housing at BYU. Now that I look back at it, that doesn't make any sense at all. It's really exclusive, even inside of the church. But I was like, oh, okay. Well,
to live in a dorm?
No, student housing off campus.
Oh, okay.
Is what we were applying for. A dorm, yeah, for sure. And I mean, you'd have to be going to the school for that.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, so. Oh, right. So my roommate and I were going to do our interview, and she went first, and she felt so guilty that she had made out with this guy once, her boyfriend, that she confessed. She was in there for about 45 minutes for a 10-minute, 15-minute interview. And she came out, she's like, I feel so much better. I'm like, why? She's like, I just confessed everything. And he kept asking me, make it. Now that I'm out of the church and a little bit less innocent and ignorant, I look back and I am 80 to 90% positive that guy was trying to get as many details from this 18-year-old girl, 17, 18-year-old girl.
That is so gross.
Yeah, because, and this is why I think that, because it was my turn. And I went in there and he kept saying, so, got a boyfriend or this or that? Have you ever made out with anybody? And I'm like, nope, I haven't. I have a long distance kind of boyfriend. And he's like, anything you need to confess? I'm like, no, really. I'm on the up and up with God right now. I didn't say that, but I really was. As far as religion goes, I was on course. And he kept like, you sure? I'm like, oh, yeah, dead center, eye contact. Yes, I'm sure. I am worthy to go to the BYU campus area. He was like, all right, well then I guess you can go and I'll sign off on this. I'm like, all right, thanks. Didn't think anything of that at all. But he was, when I look back, he was really prying. Like, just, can you not accept my I am chaste answer?
That's so gross. This is a good, like, nausea-inducing episode. I like none of this.
Well, fortunately, that's the worst I had.
Oh.
There's so many people who, and I didn't even understand what was happening at the time. People have been through infinitely worse than that in even the Mormon church, in every church.
Yeah.
But surprisingly to me, also the Mormon church. But so, no matter where you go, religion is terrible. So anyway, so there's the basics. And you look heartily for a companion. And they always say companions of like spouse or husband or wife. Anyway, doesn't matter. So now me, I'm going to say I was more realistic than my roommates were. They were like, I'm 19 years old. I'm not getting married ever. Or like they would spend the entire evening showing each other ring. They didn't even have boyfriends. And they're like picking out their wedding colors and looking at wedding dresses and the rings. Like, I'm going to have him get that ring. I'm like, who the hell are you talking about? There is no one in your life. And they were obsessed with marriage and it drove me insane. But that's the culture. That was the culture everywhere in the college ages.
It's all a Disney movie. That's what
so ridiculous.
That's what the expectation is.
I hated it so much. I was like, this is worse than high school. This is worse than high school because in high school you're
because the leashes come off a little bit and they're allowed to start indulging in some of the energy they weren't permitted to let out in their teens. Barely.
Not necessarily, because there were a lot of girls who'd be like, I don't want my first kiss to be until I'm over the altar or like at the altar with my companion whom I am marrying now. I want my first kiss.
You want your first kiss to be
the wedding moment.
Yeah, that's the one where you're just awkwardly mashing your dry face into some other person's face and you miss.
Like, I don't know who this is anymore. Suddenly I'm kind of appalled, like I'm grossed out. Like, oh, whoops, married the wrong guy. Here we are forever. Yeah, so the women at least were, they had these ideals about. They never talked about the wedding night. It was always the wedding day. And they never talked about children. It was always my future husband. Mm-hmm. I was opposite of my peers in the church. I blame my parents for that. Actually, no, correction. I praise my parents for that.
Yeah.
I was not obsessed with the marriage day. I was, if I were to be obsessed, it would have been with the entire relationship after the wedding day. Because then you can suddenly become parents and stuff, and share life together. So there's that. And then me growing up, I was, raised by two parents who were extremely devoted to each other. Mm-hmm. I'm not the best person to talk about this because of my experiences. I never got asked to prom, no dates, no nothing. I never had that drive to, like, kiss anybody. I was straight and narrow, holding on tight to the rod of iron. I was just so obedient. And I had no interest, no curiosity to even begin to go there. Au contraire, I was terrified terrified, because being married meant you had to have sex, and sex was a huge topic in the church in two ways. Number one being a quote very important part of your marriage. And like once it starts, if it ever starts to fade away, your marriage is going to start to fade away. You have to keep having sex to have a successful marriage. I've heard that. I had heard that from leaders of the church, high up leaders of the church, you know? And so I grew up thinking now then that marriage was just about sex. And then on the other hand,
I just have to interject. I hate that particular concept because it turns marital sex into something mechanical.
Yeah.
It turns it into an oil change.
Ugh.
Like, unless you
Yeah.
keep up with it, you're going to burn the engine out and ruin the car.
Yeah.
Like, when I was in, my youth group as a kid, sex would come up and stuff. And the way that it was always framed was, it's a beautiful, meaningful, personal expression of love between, between a husband and wife. And like, I understood that made sense. Like, I still think that that's correct, although I would expand it out being like, it doesn't have to be a husband and wife.
Right.
But it just, two people who love each other. But and that's kind of what I was expecting you to say, was something more along those lines.
My parents, well, my mother, my dad, and I never really talked about sex, obviously. But my mom would tell me that. She told me, I mean, that's how she taught me the birds and the bees.
Yeah.
She said it's an expression of love. You don't want to just pass that out to anyone because, I don't know, just for reasons.
But the church attitude
church was
on
louder
it,
than my mom was.
Well, and I have to. I have to just assume then that like that was not part of like their message, was that it's an expression of love, but rather like a marital duty.
Yes,
that's
how it felt to
so
me.
gross, so gross, so
But
gross.
Then you come around to the other 180 degrees of that, and you have the conflict of sex is dirty. And you cannot have any form of sexual activity before you're married, other than just kissing and maybe making out.
Yeah.
The problem is then that is there a switch all of a sudden overnight? Like one day you get married, then that night sex is suddenly not dirty anymore.
Yeah.
I've spent my entire life hearing no sex, no sex, no sex, no anything. You've got to keep yourself pure and clear.
Yeah.
And then it's terrible, it's bad, it's dirty, no this, no that, and then suddenly it's fine.
Yeah, it's big again. That's a mechanical thing.
Yeah,
that's a computer doing a check, on an interval and saying not married. That's a zero.
False.
Not married. False. Not married. False. Not married. False. Married. True. Like that's not
sex. Yes.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's just another way of boiling things down to mechanics.
Yeah.
And that's not how human beings function. They just don't.
No, we're very emotional.
Like
We just are.
I mean, you nailed it, right on the head. It's you spend, I mean, in what would be a Mormon ideal, you would spend 18 years being told this is dirty, it's wrong, it's not okay, but you're expected to do it when you get married.
It's a duty.
Yeah.
I
It's
heard that actual phrase a couple of times. Not often. And they were lower people who had their own opinions. But it was still the same message, the exact same message. So because of that, I was torn, and I chose to go with the sin side of things, of the view, meaning that even after I was married, I didn't know how in the hell I was going to do that.
Yeah.
And I was filled with so much anger the older I got, because I wanted to have kids. At that point, it had started to become more children than married orientation. Like, I was going to have to get married. I was going to have sex in order to have my number one dream of being a mother, And I stopped being so romantic. I chose to be safer than sorry later and dirty myself for God.
Yeah. Which is
But
a real
despite
shame
marriage.
because it's a real shame because the actual safer path is the opposite one.
Right. To be more open.
Yeah.
And it is. And I blame the church. I mean, even
When
now.
yeah, when I mean because what they I mean that's there's a fear of God situation there that like don't do this because God will slap you on the wrist for it.
Or on the face.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
that fear, that existential terror,
Anxiety,
over-
everything it causes.
yeah, it overrides everything
does.
else. There's no way to talk sense into someone, when they're caught in the grip of that.
Right. There isn't. And it doesn't matter how much therapy. I went to quite a bit of therapy, and I
Mm-hmm.
still, they happen to be Mormon therapists.
Uh-huh.
And I couldn't find anybody who wasn't.
That's just,
And
that's literally
oxymoronic.
just more clergy, though. That's it.
is.
That's like if you just went and talked to your bishop about
It is. It is.
It's just
Exactly.
It's just a way to dress up, putting more church doctrine into your face.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, here, anyway, yeah, it was difficult. Actually, after I was getting so, like I said, the older I got, the more angry I became. And it, got to the
As
point,
any reasonable human being
right,
would.
because I was like, I don't want to be used, but that's all I'm going to be. And then with my experiences, now here's the thing. After I started to decrease my attendance to church and just started to drift away a little bit, and I was 26 years old when I made out for my first time, and my experiences at that point until I met you were that guys just wanted, just as I had been taught, guys only want sex. Guys only want sex. And even the Mormon return missionaries, as soon as they we'd meet, like online or something, okay, let's meet up. They were right into the making out and beyond, trying to get more than that. It didn't matter if they were Mormon, active or not. They still wanted whatever I was going to give up. I was not going to be used. I hated it so much.
Yeah.
And I realized that every guy, just like I had been taught, was all about sex. So you got to steer clear, protect yourself. In fact, they said like it's better to die than to give up your virtue. This is the worst part that I just realized is so terrible. Okay, the action of being raped. It's better to die in that situation before they get your virginity.
Oh my God.
So fight until you die, basically.
Here's the big question. Like, under those circumstances, is that encouraging suicide?
Right. And then you're no longer clean and it's not your fault, but you didn't die fighting. So yeah, it is your fault. You gave that up. You didn't fight hard enough for your virginity, and now you're broken in more ways than just mentally. Like your world shatters with something like that. I can't even imagine. Anyway, so there's that, is that virginity was extremely important for women, for young girls. I met this young man when I was 15, and at 16 he lived in Ohio. We met in Utah. Then he and his mom moved to Ohio, and separately we had these revelations separately that he and I were going to end up together. And so we started liking each other, right? I mean, you're like, oh, hey, this is my future husband. Got to get on this like train. Start falling in love with him, And his mom was really into this too. And it was like a little three. My mom knew I liked this guy, but his mom was very into us getting married as well.
When y'all were 15.
16 at this point.
Oh, okay, that's not...
We met at 15. 16, we started kind of dating.
Okay. That's still weird. Super
it is,
weird.
yeah. Well, but I mean, it's really based around religion. You get a revelation.
Yeah.
That's it.
Ugh.
Anyway, so after he and I both had admitted to each other that we'd started to like each other, and then just ultimately ended up somehow it came out on one side or the other that we had that revelation that we were going to get married, should get married anyway. His mom sent me a tape of a kind of play, not really a play, but it was music and spoken a little bit about chastity and saving yourself for the marriage, why consummation is so important, why it should only be the first time, all of this stuff. And I was so uncomfortable hearing that thing because I knew that already and I wasn't worried. And it's almost like saying we don't trust you, so here's more of a hammer, even more to your head about this idea. But I forced myself to listen to it over and over again to try and make it more natural to myself. And I swear it was one of the, I wanted to puke every time I heard it though. I don't know why, but I was already so uncomfortable with the idea of having to have sex. Now there isn't only a don't have sex, but there's also a have sex once you're married to him kind of feeling. And it just reinforced that, sex is dirty forever thing for me. And it was a duty and I didn't want it to be that way. Anyway, that was the beginning. My first relationship was that kind of thing. I don't know. I can't explain it. The tearing of like my mind, my spirit, and like everything. It just fighting those two things was so hard. Anyway, so relationships weren't supposed to be just sex. They sure felt like they were supposed to be though. Anyway, when you finally go to the temple, this is wording that I feel has been shared outside of the temple. I've heard it outside, so I'm going to use this wording.
Okay.
But they say to the women, you make a promise that you vow to obey your husband in so much as he obeys God. And I saw my parents as an equal companionship. They loved each other. They supported each other. They made huge decisions together. And so I understood that if my husband was going to be a righteous man, I would be obedient to him. You know, that seems to be filtered out into a thing of just the women need to be obedient to the men.
Yeah, well, because the underlying message there is that you don't scrutinize how the men behave. They're already being obedient to God,
or
by virtue of being men.
Well, they say that because Eve was the first one to sin, then women need to be obedient to the second person to sin, which was a man.
And isn't it convenient that we're punishing women for a thing that God had set up and knew was going to happen anyway and made happen, and that there was no way out of that, and that was the whole plan for like making humanity mortal or something, but we're still going to punish women for it for just whatever reason.
First mother.
Well, it wasn't even technically a choice of hers. I mean, the dominoes were all set up, and all that had to happen was God watching it happen, and that's not really a choice, is it? And so, but it's an eternal finger wag for the rest of time because you allowed yourself to knock over the string of dominoes I set up.
Yeah, and like I said, by filtering out, I mean I've heard two situations in this kind of thing. One of which was told by, I think I want to say a seminary teacher. Or an institute teacher. Institute is religious class in college.
Or it is a very quick fart.
Institute?
An institute.
Oh my. I was thinking, oh my gosh. I was like maybe a psych ward or something. And you bring up fart. What the hell? That was a good one though. That really was a good one. So in Institute, somebody was talking about preparation for the temple, okay? And then they said this experience that this sealed husband and wife, the man had decided that they needed to up and move and not take a job even, just move their family to a completely different state somewhere. She didn't feel comfortable with that, and he was just forcing it on the whole family. So she's, please, let's not do this. He's like, no, we're doing it. She still felt uncomfortable about it. So he actually commanded her in the name of God to obey him and move. So she actually went to the bishop and said, this is happening. Please help me. And he's like, no, you've got to be obedient to your husband. So she went up to the stake president. I need help with this. He's not being equal here with me. You have to listen to your husband. He's the priesthood holder. He's the one who receives revelation for the family. And up and up the chain.
That's a really artful way of dodging just the plain message underneath, which is like, no, you are not as good as he is. You don't matter as much.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it was a bad example. Like, okay, well, whatever. Anyway, so those are some things that I was fortunate enough to not witness, not be a part of, not have experienced on my own.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's because my parents were so strong together, and I saw that, and I wanted that, and I knew that it was possible. Nobody else really sees that in their own parents. I mean, it's rare to see that in your own parents. I feel my parents fought still. They did. Yeah. You know, they argued and stuff, and I heard them, but they always made it through those every time, and they came out stronger for it. And they're still in love. I mean, they celebrated they had the minutes counted down to half of their life being married to each other. Yeah. And they celebrated the hell out of that day. Yeah. You know, it was really cute. You know, in fact, I had somebody comment on that. They saw my parents together, and they'd been married for, I don't know how old I was. They married for a year older than I was. Anyway, or a year longer than I am old. But my mom went on a vacation to Ohio in the church areas, you know, and my dad was here stayed at home with us kids. Well, she came back, and the woman she went with was my aunt. And they come back, and my uncle's family and our family were there to greet our mothers. And it was so cute. My dad, the moment my mom gets down off of the stairs at the airport, starts just basically running to her. And she was actually running to him. Aww. And they just hugged so hard, and big smiles. And my uncle was still watching his wife walk toward him, and he goes, they are actually still in love. I cannot believe that. And I looked at him like, holy, I was strong in the ideas of the kind of relationship I wanted. I was not going to settle because of my mom and dad. Do you know who David Archuleta is? Yeah,
he was on American Idol.
Yeah, and he's a young Mormon. He went on a mission and everything. He got engaged like 3 times. He recently came out as gay publicly. I want to show you a video real quick. This is extremely important to my next point.
Oh, okay.
As a point extension of my personal experience with the teachings of the church.
Okay.
Even though I was straight. So I'm going to show this real quick.
I grew up very religious. Grew up Church of Jesus Christ, the Latter-day Saints, aka Mormons. And for them, everything is about marriage, about being able to marry someone and procreate, essentially, because then that's the closest you can become like God, creating life. I did have to take a step away because, you know, after trying to talk to some of the church leaders and explain to them my situation, I realized there's a lot of lack of understanding with LGBT people. When I met with the church leaders, and they're like, well, don't get married. Just, you can get to know guys, but don't get married, because then you're just having unnatural sex. And I was just like, it's so interesting that you talk about marriage as if it's only about sex, because the way you've raised me to believe marriage is it's a beautiful partnership where you want to share your life with them, help someone progress, and help them reach their goals, create goals together, create a family, even if it's not the way that I was taught that it needed to look. You can still have a family being part of the LGBT community.
So after I saw that, I wrote this note down. It says, I've never struggled with my own orientation, as I am straight, but David put perfect words into 2 intense struggles I had as a member of the church. For me, the way the church talks about marriage partnership and yet preaches in a way that makes even marriage ultimately seem evil in and of itself was mentally and emotionally tearing me apart. I always wanted to be a mother to children I had carried myself. I wanted the full experience. But to get there, even married, would mean I would have to have sex. To me, sex was literally the most evil thing in the world for so many reasons. I could not reconcile it with motherhood, and I became extremely angry about so many things, men being the absolute worst of them, because they always wanted such filth as it is, you know. It has taken over a decade's time leaving the church, a marriage, and 2 children for me to still struggle with sex. Even though his trials were different, he unwittingly touched on my own. That's just what the church does, you know, and
and it's all there for, I mean, ultimately it's all there for the purpose of just exerting control over people, ultimately for power and for wealth.
Yeah.
Is what it boils down to.
Yeah.
That's it. You know, and like I can't help but, I mean, he made a really great point there, where the only thing that the church cares about under those circumstances, and this is something that I've heard from, you know, Christians of all types, is this very much like, oh, I don't hate the sinner, I hate the sin mentality. You are fine just so long as you keep lying about who you are really on the inside, and basically just don't be gay anymore.
pray
That's
the
it.
gay
Just
away.
don't be gay. Don't be gay, Sparky.
Don't be gay, Sparky. Yeah.
Like that's what they want. They, you know, but they say it in ways that make it more flowery, or make it seem more civil, but it's not.
Or even yeah.
Don't be you anymore. Do what we want you to do. So in regard to, you know, the conflict between, you know, the whole sex being evil thing, but then also, you know, a desire for motherhood, marriage, you know, being ostensibly good, but it being tied to sex, and sex is bad. That's a lot to like process. And I just don't really understand, like, how did you sort that out?
I actually had mostly completely detached from the church. I had detached from, like, membership and everything from the church. I don't think I had my names removed yet, but I was getting old enough to be losing time for being able to have children, which meant that I had to come closer to being married. And so I didn't want to destroy a marriage relationship with anxiety over sex and stuff. Like, I really didn't, to the extreme that I was feeling at the moment.
Yeah.
But I had been protecting my virginity with everything that I was, even when I drank. And guys saw, oh, she's about ready. I wasn't, and they would try and make a pass or a move or something, and I always pushed them away, even intoxicated. My virginity, the control over my virginity, was more important to me.
Yeah.
Which proved to me at the time, I was like, what? All these things, side note here, all these things that the church says about being drunk, like, it will change your behavior. No, it does not. It enhances your personal self. Like, you have control over what you do. You do. It's just that now your inhibitions have weakened, and you're no longer afraid of the consequences.
Yeah. Or you just don't see what the big deal is about
Right.
the consequences. Like,
Right.
oh, that's for sober me to deal with. That's not
Yeah.
who I am right now.
Right. And you only do you.
Yeah.
You know, that's all you do. When you're drunk, you just do you. And my me was to not have sex. So I actually, getting closer to this age, the age of, you know, not having to have children now, in preparation of that relationship, I forced myself to have sex with someone. I was someone. I was sober, I decided when and where. It was something I was just going to do, but I forced it.
Yeah.
So that I could just let loose and see, okay, it's not that scary. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
Let go so that you're not destroying a relationship that is actually good for you, that you want to be in.
Yeah.
I went home the next day and just cried to my mom, like, Mom, I've had sex. So bad. That whole day I was just devastated. But
Yeah.
I still kept trying with that guy and like forcing activity, sexual activity out of myself. I just had to jump, literally just force myself into that cold water.
Yeah.
You know,
It's a hard step to take.
it really was. But it definitely detached. It was, I think, the beginning of my strength to detach myself completely from the church. I'm still not necessarily detaching, but dealing with the effects of having been there and of leaving.
Yeah.
Emotional, mental ties still.
Yeah.
Like in being defensive for the church, and mostly the people in the church who still believe, honestly, they're the ones that keep me hanging on. But
Yeah.
that decision to force myself as far away from the church as I could in my actions helped me to completely start letting go and start healing from everything that I had been taught, and everything I see now as was just flat out manipulation and abuse.
Yeah.
Not a subtle abuse for me. You know, it wasn't like an actual like molestation sort of situation. It was just mental and emotional abuse that I went through for my whole life there. So that was ultimately my experiences with having been in the church, having been out of the church. It was all very difficult the whole time. And because of my parents having that mutual companionship side by side, holding hands, always being equals, I did not have to deal with the image of myself being like subservient to my husband versus now I can be equal. You know, I didn't have my own personal role in my head changed because of my parents. My parents were that rock that I was able to hang on to and ultimately reach in my desires of back to my young, youthful, romantic self. Yeah. You know, and then to having my own personal family, not just having kids, and just having an actual family and a relationship that I am comfortable in, and when I feel that I'm not higher or lower in, absolutely because of my parents. Yeah. I was very lucky. So I feel like I don't have necessarily a typical experience in that way in my views of myself.
I would definitely say that's not. Yeah. The specifically just the example from your parents is not typical.
Not even outside of religion.
But even then, it's more than just that, because I would say that probably most people don't have the probably most women don't end up kind of having to go through the level of like internal conflict over the weirdness of sex within the church. I would imagine it's absolutely still there, but I think that the way that you internalize that and process that was probably a more heightened version of it. I don't know. I could be totally talking out my ass, and I don't know what I'm saying. I just feel like I know you well enough to know that I feel that this is probably a thing that was just a Mount Olympus of sticking points. Like this was the big one.
Absolutely.
And that's I don't know where I'm going with that, but yeah, definitely that your experience there would not be, in my opinion, typical. I don't think.
I don't think so. I mean, I imagine the upbringing of the church being typical, and the mental tearing apart of your own.
Well, yeah,
being typical.
The process,
right?
Yeah, it's one size fits all.
It was awful, but I think that I came out of it though atypically.
Yeah.
All thanks to them. Like, my parents are amazing. They still hold hands walking down the street. I looked out. Yeah. So there's the wrap. There's that. That's it. That's basically it. From my side, I would actually be interested in hearing other parts, other sides of the story within the church, people who actually didn't have the kind of example that I had, who were raised thinking that they had to be obedient and to their husbands. And I would like, if anybody has any stories they want to share, or comments or questions, especially the stories. Like, I just want to hear other angles of it. I know I was super lucky, and I want to know what was more common, I guess. So send me your stuff, your experiences, and let me know how life actually really was for you. Yeah, and thank you so much for listening, guys. Really appreciate it. And send us your questions, your experiences. Send us topics you want to hear about. We'll approach them. We'll talk about them. It'll be great. Contact us at either on Facebook at Beyond a Doubt Podcast, Instagram Beyond a Doubt Podcast. There's an email you can get to. It's contact@beyondadoubt.net. Yeah, and then just send us your stuff. We'll read it and listen, like us, subscribe to us, love us, accept us.
Send us cookies.
Send us cookies. We'll send you our address if you have cookies for us. All right. Well, have a good day and evening, and
See ya.